Chapter 4, The Wise Men, the Illuminated Ones. Quote, "A nation can survive its fools and even the ambitious, but it cannot survive treason from within. An enemy at the gates is less formidable, for he is known and he carries his banners openly, but the traitor moves among those within the gate freely." Close quote. Cicero. The secret origins of Skull and Bones. The story begins at Yale University in Connecticut. Elihu Yale was born near Boston, educated in London, and served with the British East India Company, eventually becoming governor of Fort St. George, Madras, in 1687. He amassed a great fortune from trade and returned to England in 1699. Yale became known as quite the philanthropist. Upon receiving a request from Collegiate School in Connecticut, he sent a donation and a gift of books. After subsequent bequests, Cotton Mather suggested the school be named Yale College in 1718. A statue of Nathan Hale stands on the campus at Yale University. There's also a replica of that statue in front of the CIA's headquarters in Langley, Virginia. Yet another stands in front of Phillips Academy in Andover, Massachusetts, where former President George H.W. Bush went to prep school. Nathan Hale, along with 3 other Yale graduates, was a member of the Culper Ring, one of America's first intelligence operations. Established by George Washington, it was successful throughout the Revolutionary War. Nathan Hale was the only operative to be ferreted out by the British, and after speaking his famous regrets, he was hanged in 1776. Ever since the founding of the Republic, the relationship between Yale and the intelligence community has been unique. The order, also known as Skull and Bones, was incorporated as the Russell Trust in 1856. A Yale junior cannot ask to join. He is asked to join, but only after much personal information has been gathered on him. The student is referred to as a knight while he is in school, and it's significant that the order has maintained control of Yale finances since 1873. The college press is controlled by the order as well. One example of a Yale editor and a member of the order who made it big was Thomas Cochrane, who became an influential partner in the J.P. Morgan banking firm. Of the first 15 members of the order, the political influence can be seen immediately. Rufus Hart entered the Ohio Senate. Asiel Hooker Lewis entered the Ohio legislature. Samuel Marshall entered the Illinois state legislature. William Howard Taft was the only man to be both president and Chief Justice of the United States. And Frederick Mather entered the New York legislature. The majority of Bonesmen comes from old-line Puritan families, including the following: Whitney, Lord, Phelps, Wadsworth, Allen, Bundy, Adams, Stimson, Taft, Gilman, and Perkins. A second group of families in the Skull and Bones includes Harriman, Rockefeller, Payne, Davison, Pillsbury, and Weyerhaeuser. The Order of Skull and Bones was once called the Brotherhood of Death. At any given time, only about 600 members of the order are alive. Of that number, only 150, about 1/4, take an active role in society. It is estimated that a core of perhaps 20 to 30 families runs the order. Recent Bones inductees include a few blacks, gays, and even some foreign students. In 1991, Skull and Bones began to admit women. Each initiate gets $15,000 and a grandfather clock. A neophyte's name is changed to Knight so-and-so. The old knights are known as patriarchs. Outsiders are known as Gentiles and Vandals. It meets annually, patriarchs only, on Deer Island in the St. Lawrence River. A pamphlet on Bones described the walls of the tomb as, quote, adorned with pictures of the founders of the members of the society in Germany when the chapter was established here in 1832, close quote. Author Anthony Sutton pointed out, quote, think about this. Skull and Bones is not American at all. It is a branch of a foreign secret society, close quote. Sutton concluded that Skull and Bones, quote, is a clear and obvious threat to constitutional freedom in the United States. Its secrecy, power, and use of influence are greater by far than the Masons or any other semi-secret, mutual, or fraternal organization, close quote. It is an elite group by any measuring rod. Roots of Bones in the Bavarian Illuminati. While critics concede that the Illuminati, quote, was an actual group that existed from 1776 until 1785, it also explained that, quote, given the fact that Weishaupt's ideas ran counter to the authoritarian church intertwined with the state power structure, he was forced to keep his Illuminati secret and work through Masonic lodges. He was not successful, but successful in securing the seal of the order on the back of our currency, Novus Ordo Seclorum, New World Order, close quote. Sutton makes numerous tentative comparisons between the Illuminati and Bones. Each member, according to an 1876 anonymous satire, has, quote, an inside name. And these, quote, names bear a remarkable resemblance to those used by the Illuminati. Examples being Chilo, Eumenes, Glaucus, Pristicus, and Arbaces, close quote. He added, quote, during its time, the Illuminati had widespread and influential membership. Also, Sutton states, quote, the significance of this study is that the methods and objectives of the Illuminati parallel those of the order, close quote. He later wrote, quote, at this point, we want to draw a comparison between the order known as Skull and Bones and the order known as Illuminati in the 18th century Bavaria, close quote. Sutton states, quote, Bones was introduced in the United States by William Russell, later General William Russell, who brought a charter back from his student days in Germany, close quote. When the Skull and Bones Temple was raided in 1876, a card was found that read, quote, from the German chapter, presented by Patriarch D.C. Gilman of D50, close quote. The Yale Bones catalogs indicate that Skull and Bones began in the U.S. in the third decade of the second period of the organization. The first decade of the second period would be 1800, with the first period being 1790 to 1800. Quote, that places it in the time frame of the elimination of Illuminati by the Bavarian elector, close quote. In 1988, Anthony Sutton wrote Two Faces of George Bush. In this work, he identified George W. Bush, governor of Texas, as a bonesman, like his president father. Another influential name associated with the Order of Skull and Bones was Whitney. William Collins Whitney was initiated into the order in 1863. He was Secretary of the Navy from 1885 to 1889. William Collins Whitney married Flora Payne, who was the daughter of the Standard Oil treasurer Oliver Payne. Payne Whitney, one of the two sons of William Collins Whitney, was initiated into the Order of Skull and Bones in 1894. The key Whitney son, however, was Harry Payne Whitney, initiated in 1898, who was involved with Guarantee Trust and the Guggenheim Exploration Company. Harry Payne Whitney married Gertrude Vanderbilt in 1896, and so the wealthy became wealthier. The son of Harry Payne Whitney and Gertrude Vanderbilt was Cornelius Vanderbilt Whitney, who married Marie Norton. Cornelius and Marie divorced, but not without Marie getting a tidy bit of the now Whitney Payne Vanderbilt fortune. Divorcee Marie Norton then proceeded to tie her fortune to similar wealth, that of W. Averell Harriman. This is only a very brief account of illustrating how power finds power generationally, and a perpetuating cycle takes place. W. Averell Harriman had acquired his money as a railroad magnate. Both his sons, Edward Rowland Nolan Harriman and William Averill Harriman, attended Yale and became initiates of the order. W. Averill Harriman's father, Edward H. Harriman, married Mary Averill, the daughter of a New York banker and railroad president. At the age of 22, he bought a seat on the New York Stock Exchange. Even though E. H. Harriman gave $250,000 to Theodore Roosevelt's Republican National Committee, 2 years after the gift, Roosevelt wrote Senator Sherman and described Harriman as a man of, quote, deep-seated corruption and a, quote, unquote, undesirable citizen and, quote, an enemy of the Republic, close quote. The Dictionary of American Biography states that Harriman was guilty of restraint of trade, and that led to an investigation by the Interstate Commerce Commission. His dubious financial activities netted him $60 million. The deal was transacted through Kool, Loeb and Company, his backers and bankers. It was Jacob Schiff of Kuhn Loeb, remember, who gave $20 million to support the communist revolution in Russia. Another member of the Order of Skull and Bones who was active in aiding the communist Bolsheviks was Amos Pinchot. Pinchot's greater claim to fame, however, was that as a member of Skull and Bones. He was founder of the American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU. William Averill Harriman graduated Yale in 1913. He started with his father's company, Union Pacific Railroad, and his legacy continues. His legacy includes 1917, organized the Merchant Shipbuilding Corporation, sold all shipping interests in 1925. 1917, director of Guarantee Trust. Family holdings of about 1/3 of Guarantee stock were put into a J.P. Morgan voting trust in 1912. 1920, established W.A. Harriman Company with his brother Roland as vice president. 1923, formed Georgian Manganese Company. 1933, W.A. Harriman merged with Brown Brothers to become Brown Brothers Harriman. 1934, Special Assistant Administrator of Roosevelt's National Recovery Act. 1941, Minister to Great Britain in charge of Lend-Lease for Britain and Russia. 1941, Ambassador to the Soviet Union. 1946, Ambassador to Great Britain. 1948, U.S. Representative to ECA in Europe. 1950, Special Assistant to President Truman. 1951, U.S. Representative at NATO defense meetings. 1951, Director of Mutual Security Agency. 1955, Governor of State of New York. 1961, Ambassador at Large. 1961, Assistant Secretary of State for Far East. 1963, Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs. 1968, U.S. Representative at Paris Peace Talks on Vietnam. 1974, Chairman of the Democratic Party Foreign Policy Task Force. 1975, Limited Partner Brown Brothers Harriman. 1983, visited the KGB's Yuri Andropov in Moscow. Admittedly, few people have a career like Averill Harriman's. The point of highlighting his extensive resume is to illustrate the intricate network between finance, government service, and other activities. Many of the ruling elite move into similar positions over a 45 to 50-year career. The network is about ambitious promotion for the advancement of the world on their terms according to their agenda. An extract from a report by Ambassador Harriman of Moscow to the State Department dated June 30th, 1944, admitted that Stalin paid tribute to the assistance rendered by the United States to Soviet industry before and during the war. He said that about 2/3 of all the large industrial enterprises in the Soviet Union had been built with United States help or technical assistance. Averill Harriman's wife was Pamela Harriman, who contributed heavily to the election of Bill Clinton. For her financial contribution and support, she was made ambassador to France. She died in that position and was considered by many to be a modern-day courtesan. Guarantee Trust Company was founded in New York in 1864. In 1910, it merged with Morgan Trust Company. In 1912, it merged with Standard Trust Company. In 1929, it merged with the National Bank of Commerce. In 1912, Mrs. Edward Harriman sold her block of 8,000 shares of the total outstanding 20,000 shares to J.P. Morgan, a close colleague of the Rothschilds. Since that time, the J.P. Morgan firm had effectively controlled Guaranty Trust, and since 1954, the merged firms have been known as Morgan Guaranty Trust Company. Where did the original capital for Guaranty Trust come from? It came from the Whitney, Rockefeller, Harriman, and Vanderbilt families, all represented significantly in the order of Skull and Bones. The Rockefeller investment in Guaranty Trust was represented by Percy Rockefeller, who was born in 1878, the son of William D. Rockefeller and brother of John D. Rockefeller. Percy became a member of the order in 1900 and was a director of Guaranty Trust in the 1915 to 1930 period. Harry Payne Whitney, the order 1894, inherited 2 Standard Oil fortunes, one each from the Payne and Whitney families. Harry Payne Whitney was a director of Guaranty Trust, as was his father, William C. Whitney, with the order 1863. By 1930, W.A. Harriman and Company had merged with a financial giant called Brown Brothers, a private international banking firm founded in 1800. Now referred to as Brown Brothers Harriman, the firm carefully brought in no less than 9 individual partners who were members of the order. 2 of the lesser-known partners of Brown Brothers Harriman are Skull and Bones men, W.A. Harriman and Knight Woolley. But the most notable was Prescott Bush, the father of George Bush. Prescott Bush was initiated into the Order of Skull and Bones in 1917 and was a partner in Brown Brothers Harriman for over 40 years. George Bush became a member of Skull and Bones in 1949. George Bush's oldest son, George W. Bush, was also initiated into the secret Order of Skull and Bones in 1968. Anthony Sutton, one of the foremost authorities on this subject, informs us that from World War I well into the 1930s, the Order's frontman in both Guaranty Trust and Brown Brothers Harriman was Matthew C. Brush. Brush was the chairman of the Georgian Manganese Company when its site was in Russia. Harriman formed this company in 1923. In 1925, a concession agreement was made between W.A. Harriman Company of New York and the communist USSR for exploitation of the Shayaturi manganese deposits and extensive introduction of modern mining and transportation methods. Now, who was Matthew Brush? Brush was not from Yale, nor was he a member of the Order of Skull and Bones. Rather, Brush was a Knight Templar, a 32nd degree Mason, and Shriner. In 1932, Knight Woolley, a member of the Order of Skull and Bones, was a director of Guaranty Trust and a director of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. Woolley was a director of the Union Banking Corporation of New York City. The Harrimans had a financial stake in Union Banking, and E. Roland Harriman, W. Averill Harriman's brother, was a director of this Union Banking Corporation. Another bank called the Bank voor Handel en Schiefpovat, New York, NV, controlled the Union Banking Corporation in New York. In other words, this Dutch bank was affiliated with the W.A. Harriman financial interests in New York. The details of this joint operation show that this bank, Union Banking Corporation, of which E. Roland Harriman was director, helped finance Hitler. Most revealing of all, however, is the fact that Prescott Sheldon Bush, father of George Bush, was a partner of Brown Brothers Harriman and a director of Union Banking with Harriman and Woolley in 1932. In his book, The Secret Establishment, Anthony Sutton says that this secret society of German origin has links with Britain through Lazard Freris, the private merchant bankers, and one of the private banks which owns the Federal Reserve. The first chairman of the Federal Reserve was Pierre Jay, another member of Skull and Bones. The point person for the Federal Reserve was Senator Carter Glass of Virginia, a 33rd degree Freemason of the Scottish Rite. It all begins to fit together when we add in the developers and owners of the private Federal Reserve Bank, the Rothschild, Guggenheim, Schiff, Warburg, and Rockefeller families. Sutton states, quote, "There is an Illuminati connection," close quote. Good genes or proper birthright? American history begins to look a little different than they teach it in school when you take into account the influence of the Order of Skull and Bones. A prominent member of Skull and Bones was Henry Stimson, initiated in 1888. By 1890, Stimson was fresh out of Yale, the Order, and Harvard Law School. William C. Whitney had been the Secretary of the Navy and had as his attorney Elihu Root. Stimson joined Root's law firm and later married the daughter of Charles A. White, another member of Skull and Bones. When President Taft needed a Secretary of War in 1911, he appointed Stimson. In 1927, under President Coolidge, Stimson was appointed Governor General in the Philippines. Under President Hoover in 1929, Stimson became Secretary of State. In 1940, Stimson was appointed as President Roosevelt's Secretary of War. And in 1945, under 33rd degree Mason President Truman, Stimson recommended the atomic bomb drops on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the two most Roman Catholic sites in Japan. During World War II, Stimson had as a Skull and Bones sidekick a special assistant, Harvey Hollister Bundy, initiated into Skull and Bones in 1909. During his tenure as Secretary of State, Stimson brought in Harvey's son, McGeorge Bundy, who was initiated into the order in 1940. McGeorge Bundy was Special Assistant for National Security Affairs to President Kennedy and Johnson. He was National Security Advisor in the early years of the Vietnam War. At the very same time, his brother, William P. Bundy, initiated into Skull and Bones in 1939, was Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs. In 1972, William Bundy became editor of Foreign Affairs, the prestigious journal of the CFR, the Council on Foreign Relations. William Bundy married Mary Acheson, the daughter of Dean Acheson. Dean Acheson was a member of another very secret Yale society, Scroll and Key, an offshoot of the order. His son, David Acheson, is a member of the Order of Skull and Bones. Cyrus Vance, Secretary of State under Jimmy Carter, is also a member of the Great Society, of the Secret Society of Scroll and Key. By 1966, McGeorge Bundy was appointed president of the Ford Foundation and remained there until 1979. Bundy was carefully selected for the job, since we now know that it was Rowan Gaither of the Ford Foundation who explained to Senator Christopher Dodd that it was the objective of the Ford Foundation under direct orders from the White House to, quote-unquote, comfortably merge the United States with the Soviet Union. Other privileged notables associated with the Order of Skull and Bones include the Lord family. Oswald Bates Lord, initiated in 1926, married Mary Pillsbury of the Pillsbury Flower family, and Charles Edwin Lord II, initiated in 1949, became acting comptroller of the currency in 1981. The son of Oswald Bates Lord and Mary Pillsbury is Winston Lord, initiated in 1959, who was chairman of the CFR, Council on Foreign Relations, in 1983. The Lord family legacy goes back much further than 1926. Since 1854, at least 6 members of the Lord family have been initiated into the Order of Skull and Bones. In 1854, George DeForest Lord was initiated into the order and became a New York lawyer. Together with his father, Daniel Lord, the law firm of Lord, Day and Lord was established. Today, one of Lord's clients is the Samuel Rubin Foundation. Samuel Rubin was a registered member of the Communist Party. The office of the Samuel Rubin Foundation, of which Samuel Rubin's daughter Cora Weiss was president, is located at 777 United Nations Plaza, which is known as the Church Center to the United Nations. The Rubin Foundation is one of the communist financiers for the Radical Institute for Policy Studies, the IPS, which has infiltrated itself thoroughly into the American government. The Institute of Policy Studies is discussed later in this book and is another fascinating study on high-level connections in government and industry. Molding the world. We know that one of the results of World War I was the League of Nations. For some, World War I was fought to establish the League of Nations, which the United States at the time had too much sense to join. Following the plan for world government, World War II culminated in the creation of the United Nations. Archibald MacLeish, also a member of Skull and Bones, was instrumental in forming the United Nations program called UNESCO, the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. The July 19, 1952 issue of Saturday Review candidly reported on the purpose of UNESCO. Quote, "If UNESCO is attacked on the grounds that it is helping to prepare the world's peoples for world government, then that is an error to burst forth with apologetic statements and denials. Let us face it, the job of UNESCO is to help create and promote the elements of world citizenship. When faced with such a charge, let us all by all means affirm it from the housetops," close quote. I'm going to read that again. Quote, "If UNESCO is attacked on the grounds that it is helping to prepare the world's people for world government, then it is an error to burst forth with apologetic statements and denials. Let us face it, the job of UNESCO is to help create and promote the elements of world citizenship. When faced with such a charge, let us all by all means affirm it from the housetops," close quote. The order established the Nieman Fund, which offers a prestigious award in journalism. The first director of the Nieman Fund was Archibald MacLeish, who for many years was considered the dean of journalists. The order knows the importance of controlling the communications industry, thus avoiding exposure of their charades. Prominent members of Skull and Bones in the media included the famous Henry Luce of Time Life. Luce was a member of the powerful CFR, Council on Foreign Relations. Time Life controls and publishes Time, People, Life, Fortune, Money, and Sports Illustrated magazines. In the foreword of the book Beyond Survival, published in 1959, Luce stated that the objective was, quote, "to spur the government and people of the United States to arrive at some convictions, intellectual convictions about what they are doing in the world. Recently, I found that the American people's most commonly shared opinion is that the United States lacks a clear sense of purpose in its world activities," close quote. Therefore, Life initiated distinguished Americans to respond to what Luce called, quote, "a summons of some urgency," close quote, on the national purpose. They included Adlai Stevenson and David Sarnoff. Stevenson was a CFR, Council on Foreign Relations member, who presided at the United Nations. He ran for president as a Democrat against Republican Dwight Eisenhower when both were members of the CFR. David Sarnoff, a member of the CFR, Council of Foreign Relations, was appointed chairman of the board of RCA in 1929. Sarnoff had acted as an assistant to Owen Young, a close colleague of J.P. Morgan at the 1919 Paris Peace Building, the Paris Peace Conference. I'm going to read that again. Sarnoff had acted as an assistant to Owen Young, a close colleague of J.P. Morgan at the 1919 Paris Peace Conference. Sarnoff was a former British intelligence agent. The RCA building in New York was the headquarters of MI6 Chief British Intelligence Officer Sir William Stevenson. I'm going to say that again. The RCA building in New York was the headquarters of MI6 Chief British Intelligence Officer Sir William Stevenson. RCA's directorate is composed of British-American establishment figures who figure prominently in the organizations such as the CFR, NATO, the Club of Rome, the Trilateral Commission, Freemasonry, Skull and Bones, Bilderbergers, and the Round Table. Education. The first president of Cornell University was Andrew Dixon White, a member of the Order of Skull and Bones. The first president of the University of California was Daniel Oilman, also a member of the Order. Oilman then became the first president of Johns Hopkins University. Oilman also became the first president of the Carnegie Institution, which has enormous influence for all America today. The Order of Skull and Bones has been able to manage and control education in this country by controlling book content. The public school system is largely responsible for the alienation our children feel for themselves, their parents, their country, and the Christian religion. This did not happen by accident. John Dewey, considered the father of the American education system, was trained at Johns Hopkins University from 1882 to 1886 under the Hegelian philosopher George Sylvester Morris. Morris received his doctorate from the University of Berlin. Daniel Oilman hired Morris, knowing full well that Morris was Hegelian in philosophy, meaning that education was not meant to be child-centered, but rather state-centered. For Hegel, the child has no value as an individual. For Hegel, the child has no value as an individual, except as he or she performs a function for society. For Hegel, every quality of an individual exists only at the mercy and will of the state. To understand this concept is to understand what has happened to American education over the last 2 generations. The dumbing down was a desired goal. The University of Chicago was founded in 1890 with Rockefeller money. In 1894, Dewey went to the University of Chicago and in 1902 was appointed director of its School of Education. Dewey believed that children do not go to school to develop individual talents, but rather are to be prepared as, quote, units in an organic society. The NEA, National Education Association, produced a program for the 1976 bicentennial entitled A Declaration of Interdependence, Education for a Global Community. In this document, we read the flowering of the Hegel-Dewey educational plan for the world. Quote, "We are committed to the idea of education for a global community. You are invited to help turn the commitment into action by mobilizing world education for development of a world community unity." Close quote. Promoting the beliefs of Hegel and Dewey, an associate professor of educational management and development at New Mexico State University, states, quote, "When community educators say that community education takes into consideration blah, 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 blah. Woo. Promoting the beliefs of Hegel and Dewey, an associate professor of educational management and development at New Mexico State University, states, quote, "When community educators say that community education takes into consideration the total individual and his total environment, they mean precisely this. It seeks to integrate the individual within himself and within his community until the individual becomes a cosmic soul and the community the world." Close quote. The families in the order are closely associated with more foundations and more sources of funding than the Rockefeller family. To be sure, the Rockefeller family has influence, But this doesn't compare to the centuries-long pervasive influence of the order. It was the order, after all, that got John D. Rockefeller off the ground with his General Education Board in 1904. Anthony Sutton says, quote, "In many ways, these old-line Yankee families have outsmarted the bankers. The Puritans diverted banks' wealth to their own objectives without always absorbing the banker families. The order controlled the substantial wealth of Andrew Carnegie, but no Carnegie has ever been a member of the order. The order used the Ford wealth so flagrantly against the wishes of the Ford family that 2 Fords resigned from the board of the Ford Foundation. No Ford has ever been a member of the order." Close quote. Many influential academic associations were started by members of Skull and Bones and persons close to the order. Anthony Sutton remarks that the American Historical Association, the American Economic Association, and the American Chemical Society and the American Psychological Association are, quote, "key associations for the conditioning of society," close quote. The point of all this information is not just to show the lineage of the family tree, but the almost unimaginable interconnection and interpromotion of these families generation after generation. Mazzini, Albert Pike, and the Italian Revolution. The plan takes form. No study of the New World Order would be complete without including some of the most fascinating stories that surround Albert Pike and Giuseppe Mazzini, the American and Italian heads of the most occult forms of Masonry in the 19th century. By 1850, European and American Masonry were in turmoil. Bavaria had forbidden Masonry as a danger to the state in 1784, then again in 1845. In 1814, the Regency of Milan and the Governor of Venice had acted in a similar manner. Pope John VI of Portugal prohibited Freemasonry in 1816, renewing the prohibition in 1824. In 1820, several lodges were closed in Prussia for political intrigues, and in the same year, Alexander I banished the order from the whole Russian Empire. A similar occurrence took place 4 years later in Spain. In 1876, anti-Masonic author Richard Carlile wrote of his fears for Britain, quote, "Let them not wait to be disbanded by the legislation as a useless and mischievous association. The deluge of mystery has not only overwhelmed Babylon, but Egypt, Greece, Rome, and will, if we do not light up the spirit of revelation in time, most assuredly overthrow this British nation," close quote. In Italy, in the early 1800s, some supporters of the Italian monarchy, along with a Catholic group, formed a secret fraternal association called the Carbonari. This was a perfect cover for the Illuminati, who soon controlled it. The Carbonari had apparently fallen for Weishaupt's ploy of making Christ the Grand Master of their lodge. This pseudo-Christian pattern was so successful that it has been followed throughout the lower degrees of Masonry ever since. The success of the Carbonari in seducing both members of the royalty and the church brought on the feared Alta Vendita, which is described in detail in this book's chapter on Freemasonry and Peter's Keys. Upon the death of Weishaupt in 1830, at age 82, control of the Illuminati fell to the Italians. This was probably because they showed a considerably greater natural proclivity for the black arts than did Weishaupt's Germans, who were under political pressure at home. According to Monsignor George Dillon, quote, "Italian genius soon outstripped the Germans in astuteness. And shortly after Weishaupt had passed away, the supreme government of all the secret societies of the world was exercised at the Alta Vendita, the highest lodge of the Italian Carbonari. The Alta Vendita ruled the blackest Freemasonry of France, Germany, and England, And until Mazzini wrenched the scepter of the Dark Empire from that body, it continued with consummate ability to direct the revolutions of Europe, close quote. Mazzini. The European and American revolutions made a shambles of Masonry, though it had lit the torch in these, and to the head of Italian Masonry, Giuseppe Mazzini, fell the task of repairing it. He wasted no time building on the Christian theme, but all the while pursued Masonry's unchanging anti-Christian goals with a bloody vengeance. The complete destruction of the church and all remaining European monarchies. In the permanent insurrection of the Alta Vendita, we find the following, probably authored by Mazzini, quote, "Our final end is that of Voltaire and the French Revolution, the destruction forever of Catholicism and even of the Christian idea which, if left standing on the ruins of Rome, would be the resuscitation of Christianity later on," close quote. The usual rules of secrecy were to apply, including compartmentalization. They were advised to be, quote unquote, as simple as doves, but, quote unquote, prudent as the serpent. They were told to never reveal the secrets of the order, even to their immediate families. The deception of churchmen was encouraged. Quote, "Let the clergy march under your banner in the belief always that they march under the banner of the apostolic keys," close quote. Mazzini's goals for Masonry turned out to be identical to what we would call revolutionary Marxism. For example, in 1846, 2 years before Marx and Engels published the Communist Manifesto, Mazzini spoke boldly of additional revolutions in France and Italy. He advised that the revolutions called for action, not learned debate. He felt that rhetoric should be limited to a few, quote-unquote, mottos. Quote, "Learned discussions are neither necessary nor opportune." Blah, blah, blah. For example, in 1846, 2 years before Marx and Engels published the Communist Manifesto, Mazzini spoke boldly of additional revolutions in France and Italy. He advised that revolutions called for action, not learned debate. He felt that rhetoric should be limited to a few key, quote-unquote, mottos. Quote, "Learned discussions are neither necessary nor opportune. There are regenerative words which contain all that need be often repeated to the public. Liberty, rights of man, progress, equality, fraternity are what the people will understand above all," close quote.